Welcome to this edition of Murrow Public Media Presents. I'm Lawrence Pintack, founding dean of the Edward R. Murrow College of Communication at Washington State University. As students come through the doors of this college, we teach them how to be journalists in every sense of the word. This year, we were proud to bring to Pullman a journalist who embodies the term. CBS News correspondent Clarissa Ward has reported from every major news hotspot in the past decade. Ward's work demonstrates her determination to not only get the story, but to get it right. That's why we were proud to present to Clarissa the Edward R. Murrow Award for Distinguished Achievement in Journalism.
So I thought a lot about, what should I talk about? What do people want to hear about? And, I get a lot of emails, or I have been getting a lot of emails over the years, and people ask me again and again, what does it take to make it as an international correspondent today? And I've written back, I've said, well, to make it, you need to be curious. I've written that you need to be articulate. You should be a good writer. You better not be a picky eater. Vegetarians, I warn you, you will starve. You need to be willing to rough it. And all of these are very true, but then I started thinking as I was sort of ruminating about what I wanted to talk to you about today, that perhaps the better question that we don't necessarily ask ourselves so much, rather than looking at how can you make it, is what does it really mean to be a good journalist? What does that mean? It's a very sort of abstract thing. We sort of think we know it when we see it, but we don't really necessarily know what it means. And I think Art definitely touched on it when he talked about credibility. But the other thought I had, I was going through, and I was like, yes, a good journalist is most certainly curious, but that's not everything. And, a good journalist may well be brave, although not necessarily. They may be a really hard worker, although not necessarily. So what is the one thing that really binds good journalists? Whether you're talking about Murrow or Christian Amanpour or Anthony Shadid or C.J. Shivers or whoever it may be, Martha Gellhorn. And I came to the conclusion after some thinking that the thing that binds really great journalists is that they can listen, and that they listen. And this may sound like, well, duh. Thanks, Clarissa. I'm really glad we flew you out from London to state the obvious for us. But actually, there's something to be said for this, because I think that when I look today at America, we're not so great at listening anymore these days. I see a real trend in our culture that is driven by ego, by a desire to have fame. Everybody wants to talk. Everybody's taking selfies. They've even invented sticks to facilitate better selfie taking. I mean, that takes some imagination. It's all about, going viral and being on Twitter and how many followers you can have. And these are all important things, and it's a fascinating and exciting multimedia morphing landscape to be in. But at the end of the day, it sort of feels like more and more as a culture, we like to talk, and we like to talk about ourselves more than we like to listen. And I would say that we've definitely seen that start to seep in to reporting as well. And if you'll notice, if you looked at some of Edward R. Murrow's pieces and then compare them to a modern day piece, you'll notice there's a lot more of the correspondent. Sometimes you can watch a piece and the correspondent is in almost every single frame. And if you read the news, you'll notice that journalists often are sort of becoming the story, are sort of inserting themselves into the narrative. And that may make for some really compelling, sexy storytelling or some juicy gossip, but it does come at a cost. Because when we look at reporting today, I think we see a lot more speculation and far fewer facts. And we see a lot more or a lot less of the people who are being interviewed. And God forbid if they don't speak English, you're not going to hear anything from them. Trust me, I know this from experience. And we hear a lot more from the people doing the interview. So it's become a very personality-driven business. It's a lot of it is about charisma, and there's a place for all that. And I'm not advocating otherwise. But I'm just in the course of thinking about what I wanted to talk to you about And what I wanted to give you, like what my advice would be, is to listen. So when you are sitting, if you do the same sort of job that I do, and listening to a woman who's telling you about what her life is like in this refugee camp during the winter, listen. Really listen to what she's saying. And when you're hearing the Islamic call to prayer that has been echoing through these lands for more than 1,400 years, listen to those words. What do they mean? What do they tell us? Listen to the history of these places. The history tells us so much about the present. Listen to your driver. Your driver will tell you more about a country that you've just arrived in than the 50 articles that you read on the plane before you landed that you printed out on Wikipedia. And listen to your driver when he tells you as well about the amount of scrimping and saving and hours of backbreaking work he has done to make sure that he can get his children out of this war-torn country and give them a better future. And listen to the chain-smoking foreign correspondent drinking coffee in the lobby of your hotel, because she got there a day earlier and she already knows where the protest is going to be tomorrow. And listen to your fixer when he tells you, I don't like the look of that checkpoint up ahead, we're going to turn around and go back now. And listen to the stories of these incredible characters you'll meet along the way who you will find inspiring and humbling. But equally, as a journalist, and I think sometimes we don't like this, you have to listen to people who scare you, who anger you, who maybe you find personally repugnant. And you saw that little clip from when I sat down with Western jihadis inside Syria. And one person who shall remain nameless from another network said something extraordinary to me. He said, why would you give them a platform? And I just thought to myself, it's not my job to decide who gets platforms and who doesn't and who gets to speak and who doesn't. And let's just listen to what we want to hear, which is, you know, Kim Kardashian selfie stick land, which is fine. But we also need to listen to things that are uncomfortable, that we don't always want to hear, that are maybe painful, that force us to look at ourselves and question who we are. And believe me, it will make us stronger for having done it. So I'm very lucky to work for CBS News, which is really, you know, plug CBS, but really it's a bastion of great journalists. And has been home to some of the greatest journalists of our time. One of them, I'm sure many of you know of, Bob Simon, who, as well as being an incredible mentor to me, was perhaps one of the greatest journalists of our time. And Bob, when he was killed so tragically earlier this year, I went on a 60 minutes Bob Simon binge marathon, just watching all of his pieces. And I mean, there's so many things that made Bob a genius at what he did. And if you watch some of his pieces, you notice Bob's not in every shot. He can achieve with writing what others feel the need to achieve by inserting themselves into the frame. But when you watch one of Bob's interviews, it's an extraordinary thing because he's not just waiting for the other person to finish talking so that he can start speaking, which is a rather unfortunate tendency I see sometimes. He's not looking at his prepared notes of the questions. He's got his questions all, you know, he knows exactly, he's been rehearsing them. He knows he's listening. He is completely in the moment, concentrating on what that person is saying, taking it all in. And that's why when he comes up with the follow-up question, he hits him right on the nose. Because he's listening. He's listening to what they're saying, and he's taking it in. And that's so important, and that's the power of storytelling. It's not about, hey, listen to me, look at me, I'm so fabulous. It's about listening. And, you know, so you are all gonna do so many different things. You're gonna, you know, it's multimedia world out there. Things are changing very quickly. Some of you, you know, will be doing stuff online. Some of you will be doing print. Some of you will be, well, everyone's going to be doing stuff online. Let's face it, that's the future. But, you know, some of you will be producers. Some of you will be cameramen. Some of you may do international news. Others of you will be drawn to the arts or to politics. But whatever aspect, whatever role, whatever niche you choose, this is going to serve you really well, this advice. Listen, pay attention, bear witness, and give other people's stories life by taking note. That's our job, and it's a wonderful privilege, and thank you. Go forth and conquer.
Could you help us understand a little bit about your journey and how you ended up becoming a foreign correspondent?
Sure. So my mother is American and my father is British. I was born in London and then moved to New York when I was 2, and then back to London when I was 8, and then back to the US when I was 18 for college. And my father was living in Hong Kong from the age of 14. So I traveled a lot as a kid, and I always really liked traveling. I really liked languages, and I really liked sort of adventure. And then during my senior year of college, 9/11 happened. And for me, it was like this incredibly, I mean, it was, for everyone, right? It was a life-changing moment. But my response to it was, oh my goodness, we need better communicators, or we need more communicators, or I want to be a communicator, because there's obviously this deep chasm of misunderstanding going on here. And that's sort of my central thesis on, like, all evil in the world is born out of either, power struggles, but also out of misunderstanding. And I really have found that to be true. And I've gone to all these places like Afghanistan and Syria and Iraq, and the people are wonderful. But we don't understand each other very well, and for a number of reasons, and it serves lots of people to keep things the way they are. But so that was what drew me to wanting to become a journalist. And then I went and did an internship with CNN in Moscow, and then I worked in New York on the overnight assignment desk. No one can say I didn't pay my dues. That was like the worst year ever. But I did it. And then I moved to Beirut as like a freelance producer, and I started going back and forth to Baghdad, and then eventually got the opportunity to start doing some on-air stuff, and then from there got hired by ABC News, and I did 2 years in Moscow and then 2 years in China, and now the last 3 years I've been in London for CBS, but I'm never in London.
Can you talk a little bit about the process that you go through to get interviews with rebel groups or groups that might be a bit hostile to, that are hostile to you?
Yeah. Well, with the jihadis, it's not easy. I really found that it took me like months of chatting with them online before they agreed to talk to me. But, my sort of philosophy with this is that if you go in with an open mind, I think sometimes we feel like we need to immediately tell people that they're bad people, or, tell them why they're bad people. And I actually don't find that's terribly helpful. If you're looking for dialogue, it turns out people don't like to be told they're evil. So I just go into it with a very kind of open-minded, like, hey, I'm not here to judge you. I am here to understand you better and to learn more about you. And turns out people really like to talk about themselves, like a lot. So as a journalist, when you get into that whole listening thing, it's amazing. You get them started, and then it's just like, woo, it's like a torrent comes out. And, these jihadis, I think a lot of them feel really misunderstood, and I think a lot of them have been misunderstood. Not all of them are just psychos or anything like that. The reality is always far more complex. But in general, I would, that's an unusual one. It was me online, sort of getting to know them over time. But when I've dealt with other sort of militias and various rebel groups on the ground in Syria and other places, you really rely heavily on your local staff. So on your fixer, your local producer, your translator. Those guys know what's going on. Those guys have a much better sense of the lay of the land. And, you do well to really heed their advice. And if you get a great fixer, then the sky's the limit in terms of what you can do. And if you get a bad one, as Larry knows, yeah, you're kind of screwed.
Who shot talk to us about that, because the posters we have of you in the hall are you carrying camera gear.
I shot the jihadi interview. I shot the jihadi interview because I didn't want to go in, at the time, this was in October, and at that time, a number of my friends had already been executed by the Islamic State, and so I was more than aware of the real risks of going inside Syria. I felt pretty comfortable for myself, especially as a woman. I mean, you saw me with the scarf, but when I went in, I was doing just like the eyes. And so I just thought it would be better if I went alone with a Syrian colleague as opposed to taking a Western male colleague with me, which would immediately draw attention to us, raise our profile, and potentially get us into trouble. So that's why the interview doesn't look like your average 60 minutes piece, because I shot it all myself. And that's why everybody needs to learn to do everything in this brave new world of journalism. You have to be able to do everything. And fortunately, they make things now where it's like you just literally press a button and it kind of works. So,
have you run into any obstacles being, like any extra obstacles being a woman, especially being in cultures that have different views on women?
Yeah, it's funny. I get asked that question a lot. And what's really, for me, I've always found it kind of helpful, actually. I think that, even in look, sometimes you're in a really conservative culture and it's like, you're just not going to get that interview with the local cleric, because even if he wants to do it with you, he doesn't feel comfortable because he's worried what like the other guys will say about him. But generally, I think being a woman opens a lot of doors. First of all, in conservative countries, I have access to 50% of the population that my male colleagues do not have any access to. And in places like Afghanistan, the local men will sometimes joke that you're an honorary man, which, believe it or not, is a compliment. And it's kind of, you kind of get this sweet spot, because on the one hand, you're an honorary man, so you're allowed to wander around in your trousers or pants or whatever, which they consider like, what, woman wearing jeans? That's crazy. But on the other hand, you're treated with the respect of like, you'll always, be given the food first, or the water first, or a seat first, or and then the other thing that's great, which I've really used to my advantage, because so much of my work in Syria has been undercover, is you can fly below the radar so much more as a woman. People are not looking for you, or not looking at you, frankly. They kind of seem to look right through you, especially if you're dressed conservatively. So I really have not found it to be an obstacle in my work. I was last year in Ukraine, sort of kidnapped for the day. And my team, we were pulled over by some pro-Russian separatist rebels who then blindfolded us and like drove us an hour away to some, I don't really know where we were, to be honest, some kind of place, for lack of a better word. And as they sort of took us off the bus, and they were like taking all our valuables from us, they did give them back later, full points to them for that. But so they were taking all our valuables, and this man came up and sort of started touching my butt. And that, I had like a real moment of panic there, because obviously as a woman, like, you are vulnerable, right? But then it was my male colleague who got beaten up, and not me. Like in the really worst life or death situations that I've had. And the first one that I remember most vividly was when I was 25 years old. I was in Baghdad, and the hotel that I was living in was, there was a triple suicide car bombing attack. And they sort of, like, the first bomb, they managed to get through the first sort of periphery. The second bomb, they managed to get through the second periphery. And then the third bomb was a huge cement mixer truck that was just loaded with explosives. And our security guys were watching on the balcony. And luckily, it got stuck on some razor wire. And so this truck was kind of lurching back and forth. Anyway, it was lucky because he knew, the suicide bomber this is, that he was about to get shot if he didn't blow himself up. he blew himself up at a reasonable distance from the hotel still. So the sort of the windows all blew in, and like the ceiling, like it was like everything was filled with smoke. And but we really thought we were dead or about to die, because it was clear that the hotel was under attack. And also, if you've ever been in a bomb like that, even it means just so loud, it's so jarring. And the only thought that went through my mind, it was funny, I didn't have like I wasn't feeling sort of sad or scared or like the thing that kept going through my mind was like, why am I here? Why am I here? What am I doing here? Oh my God, I might actually die here, but I don't belong here. This is nothing, why am I here? And that was my only reaction, really, was just one of like absolute fun, like completely confounded confusion that like I was potentially going to die in Baghdad, like, which made no sense because I wasn't from Baghdad and I had come here voluntarily. And so I would say in similar, in similar sort of really tense situations, you tend to like focus on one thing arbitrarily and everything's kind of in slow motion. And it's kind of this weird like, oh, wow, yeah, okay, I could actually die right now. But it's only afterwards that you experience the terror of that. And by then, someone's opened a bottle of Jack Daniels and, I don't mean to be glib, but.
How do these unique experiences change your perspective on the Western world?
Oh, like so much. I mean, really, there is so much hatred out there, a lot of ignorance, even among like really smart, well-intentioned people, which is not their failing, it's our failing in the media. And there's so much misunderstanding. I can't even begin to tell you. I hear, there's people have some pretty crazy ideas about Islam, about Muslims, about the Middle East in general. And I hope very much through my reporting to humanize people, because people, it turns out, wherever they are in the world, people are people. And it's always the ordinary civilians who are getting the raw end of the deal. Always. And always the people who are just want to keep their kids safe, just want to get their kid a decent education, just want to get their kid a chance to visit Europe or America, to have some chance at the incredible benefits that we all take for granted. And it can be extremely humbling. I remember being in Gaza just this last summer, and I went to this woman's house. We were doing a story on how children had been affected during the war there this summer. And I went to this woman's house, and she was a school teacher, and it was terrible. Like, some of the kids in the school had been killed, and a lot of family members of other kids in the school had been killed. And so we went to her apartment, and they had had no power for the better part of a month. And her like little nieces and nephews came in and just started giving me all these presents. And like, I mean, I can't even think about it right now. But I mean, and like jewelry that they had just kind of caught. And I was like, why are you giving me presents right now? Like, that's insane. That's totally insane. But that is the heart and hospitality of these people and their strength. And, so I'm like sitting there like blubbing, like, no, it's fine. Thank you for my presents. And I think sometimes I don't get to share moments like that, right? Because then I get on the news and it's all like serious face and this many people died and blah, blah, blah. And you miss those kinds of moments, which really are much more telling about the sort of fundamentals of human nature that are the same in Ukraine, in Pullman, Washington, in Gaza, in Syria, wherever. People are the same. They want to do the best they can for their families. They want to live in a secure and stable environment and occasionally enjoy like a laugh.
as an Arabic reader and speaker, so I read like Arabic journalism, and I can see the gap between the American and European journalism and between the Arab world journalism. So if you ever tried to translate any of those, and how you see the gap?
Okay, well, first of all, I read Arabic like a sort of precocious 8-year-old. So that has limited, like, I can't just like cruise through Al Hayat, like, and be like, oh yeah. So I rely on other far more gifted linguists to translate those articles for me. I mean, look, the bottom line with Arabic media is there are some good outlets there and more of them, but they tend to be, wow, does this sound familiar? Really opinionated. And so it's like you have to read 5 different papers to know what's going on. And I live in the UK where it's the same thing with the newspapers. You got to read 4 newspapers before you have any idea what's going on. And if you only read one, then you're definitely going to be like, oh my God, the Tories are going to destroy the country. I think there is some really promising Arabic media out there, and Syria in particular, there have been some really great female Lebanese and Emirati reporters who have done some really stellar work inside Syria. So I think it's really up and coming, and there's a new Arabic language news channel, it seems, every other day. So there's an enormous amount of scope for growth and opportunity there. The only thing I would say is that, it's unfortunate you have Al Jazeera, and so it's all Qatari geopolitics, or you have, whatever the channel might be, it usually adheres to whatever country's politics are. And I think that can probably be a little tiresome and limiting for Arab-speaking journalists.
We hope you enjoyed Clarissa Ward's inspiring comments. Our thanks to Ward for making the 14-hour journey to Pullman from London. And thanks to CBS News for all of their assistance to coordinate with our event. After the ceremony, I sat down with Ward for an exclusive 1-hour interview in Seattle, which will be broadcast on Northwest Public Television. If you can't watch it on air, it will be available on our website, nwptv.org. For the Edward R. Murrow College of Communication, I'm Lawrence Pintack. Thanks for watching.